Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are very pleased to share with you different stories about love and betrayal from around the world. So let's begin our story journey today. Elias didn't truly understand what it felt like to have his world collapse until the moment he pushed open that door. Friday evening, the setting sun's glow spilled across the neat suburban streets. Elias loosened his tie, driving his well-maintained mid-range sedan toward Camille's house a few blocks away. This was his routine relaxation after work, attending small community gatherings. As a seasoned accountant, Elias's life was as precise and orderly as the accounts he handled. However, in recent months, he felt that familiar order quietly crumbling. Just an ordinary birthday party, Elias muttered to himself, adjusting the rearview mirror, his gaze involuntarily lingering on the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. 50 years of age had added a certain steadiness to him. His dark brown hair slightly touched with gray, but he still maintained the characteristic dignity and bearing of a middle-aged man. Elias hadn't failed to notice Nora's recent unusual behavior. As partners for 23 years of marriage, he knew each of her habits, from how she drank her coffee in the morning to her reading posture before falling asleep at night. Recently, all these familiar patterns were changing. Nora was paying more attention to her appearance than before, frequently changing perfumes, always smiling at her phone screen, and quickly locking it when Elias approached. What concerned him most was that Nora had begun lying about attending more community activities and parent meetings, and when Elias occasionally suggested accompanying her, she always found various excuses to refuse. Maybe I'm just overthinking, Elias tried to convince himself, but his mind, trained in numbers, had already begun calculating the possibilities. As a respected couple in the community, their image had always been impeccable. Elias was responsible for family finances and long-term planning, while Nora was active in community affairs and the children's school activities. Their children were already in college, leaving only the two of them at home. Elias had thought this would bring them a second honeymoon, but the reality was that Nora seemed increasingly distant. Elias wasn't a workaholic, though he did value his professional identity as a senior accountant. Each week, he would leave work promptly, ensuring he had enough time for his family. On weekends, he often invited Nora to go hiking or try new restaurants, but Nora recently frequently declined, claiming to be too tired or having community volunteer activities. Elias turned the corner and saw many cars parked in front of Camille's house. This was a surprise birthday party for Gareth. As neighbors, Elias and Nora had a good relationship with Gareth and Camille. Over the past few years, the two families often barbecued together or visited each other on holidays. Elias had expected Nora to come with him, but Nora claimed she would go first to help Camille prepare and left alone. Though reasonable, this still added a touch of unease to Elias's heart. After parking the car, Elias straightened his clothes. He hadn't deliberately dressed up, but as someone who paid attention to detail, his shirt, slacks, and shoes all conveyed a subdued elegance. He picked up the gift he had prepared for Gareth, a bottle of whiskey that wasn't expensive but was of good quality, and walked toward the front door of Camille's house. The house was filled with laughter and conversation, music filtering through the closed windows. Elias rang the doorbell, and soon Camille opened the door with a warm smile on her face. "Elias, you're here. Great, the party just started. Gareth still doesn't know. He thinks it's just dinner for the two of us," Camille said excitedly in a lowered voice. "Am I late?" Elias asked with a smile, handing the gift to Camille. "Of course not. Perfect timing." Camille took the gift and stepped aside to let him in. "Everyone's in the backyard. Gareth will be here soon. We're preparing to surprise him." Elias nodded and followed Camille through the elegantly decorated living room. The house was packed with familiar faces, neighbors from the community, chatting in small groups. Elias smiled and greeted them, but his eyes were searching for Nora. When Elias pushed open the glass door leading to the backyard, time seemed to stand still. In the corner of the backyard, under the shade of a tree, Nora was sitting on Gareth's lap, the two of them talking intimately. One of Gareth's hands rested on Nora's waist, while Nora casually had her arm around Gareth's shoulders, with an expression of pleasure on her face that Elias hadn't seen in a long time. Even in the noisy party environment, Elias could clearly capture the unspoken intimacy between them. In an instant, all the questions and unease of the past few months had their answer. Time seemed frozen, Elias stood in place, feeling his blood turn cold. Beneath his calm exterior, a storm was brewing. Just then, someone shouted, "He's coming." Everyone hide. The crowd began to move, looking for places to hide. Nora suddenly looked up, her eyes meeting those of Elias who stood at the glass door. In an instant, Nora's face turned pale. She seemed frozen in place, her lips slightly parted but unable to make a sound. Gareth also seemed to notice something, following Nora's gaze, and when he saw Elias, the smile quickly disappeared from his face. But Elias simply stood there, expressionlessly watching them. He didn't rush over in anger, didn't loudly question, didn't even turn to leave. Instead, Elias slowly but firmly walked toward them, each step as if treading on solid ice. Nora hurriedly stood up from Gareth's lap, trying to straighten her clothes and expression. "Elias, you're here," she stammered, her voice trembling slightly with nervousness. "We were discussing the next community event." "Were you?" Elias's voice was surprisingly calm, but his gaze was terribly cold. His eyes moved between Nora and Gareth, the latter pretending to have developed a sudden interest in his drink. Just then, there was a commotion at the front door, and Camille's excited voice came through. "Everyone attention. Gareth is back. Prepare for the surprise." The lights in the backyard suddenly all went out, and people quickly found places to hide. In the darkness, Elias could feel Nora's nervous breathing and her attempt to quietly move away. A few seconds later, Camille led the surprised Gareth into the backyard. The lights suddenly came on, and the crowd jumped out cheering. "Surprise! Happy birthday!" Gareth stood there with a surprised and joyful expression, accepting everyone's congratulations and hugs. When his gaze swept to Elias and Nora in the corner, his smile froze slightly, but he quickly adjusted and continued his surprise performance. The crowd moved with Gareth toward the center of the yard. The music started again, and the party atmosphere reached its peak. Elias stood still, watching everything before him, feeling like an outsider, out of place in this joyful scene. At this moment, Camille was completely immersed in the surprise she had carefully prepared for her husband, not knowing that the real surprise was yet to come. Elias took a deep breath and walked toward the center of the yard. He wasn't an impulsive person, never had been. Every step was calculated, with the precision and coolness with which he handled complex accounts. "Everyone." Elias's voice wasn't loud, but surprisingly clear, enough to gradually quiet the surrounding conversations. "I'd like to say a few words." Camille smiled at Elias, thinking he was about to make a toast. Gareth's smile completely vanished, a flash of panic in his eyes. Nora stood behind the crowd, trembling, her face pale. "First, Camille, thank you for inviting me to this carefully prepared party." Elias's voice was steady and clear. "However, since everyone is here, I'd like to announce two things." The entire backyard fell silent, everyone's attention focused on Elias. "First, my marriage with Nora ends here, because she has been having an affair with your husband Gareth." A wave of shocked gasps came from the crowd. Camille's smile froze, looking at Elias in disbelief, then turning to Gareth, who avoided her gaze. "Second," Elias continued, turning his gaze to Nora standing at the back of the crowd. "Nora, all your supplementary cards are frozen from this moment on. Tomorrow I'll have my lawyer contact you." Having said this, Elias surveyed the stunned crowd, his final gaze landing on Camille. "I wish everyone a surprising evening." Then, Elias turned and left, his step steady, his back straight. He walked through the eerily quiet living room, pushed open the front door, and walked into the night. Behind him in the house, chaos was just beginning. Nora stood frozen in place, feeling as if all the blood in her body had congealed. She had never seen such an expression on Elias's face. That coldness beneath the calm was more terrifying than any anger. People around her began to whisper, some throwing reproachful glances her way, others sympathetic and curious. She felt exposed and humiliated as never before. The crowd began to gather around Gareth and Camille, the latter's expression quickly changing from disbelief to anger and pain. Nora watched all this, suddenly realizing what she had lost. Not just her marriage, but also the community reputation and circle of friends she had built over the years. Nora wanted to run after Elias, but her legs felt as heavy as lead. She knew that the carefully constructed life had completely collapsed in this moment. How had things developed to this point? 2 months ago, Nora still thought she had a perfect life. As an active participant in community activities and an active member of the Parent-Teacher Association, she enjoyed a good reputation in the community. Her children were performing excellently. Her husband had a stable career, and the family's financial situation was good. From the outside, she seemed to have everything many would envy. But deep in her heart, Nora felt an inexplicable emptiness. With the children going to college, the house suddenly felt empty. Although Elias wasn't a workaholic, his way of expressing feelings was always so reserved, so measured. Communication between them was decreasing, and their intimate relationship became routinely bland. We can't just live the rest of our lives seeing it pass before our eyes, Nora often told herself, looking at the face with fine lines beginning to appear in the mirror, feeling time silently slipping through her fingers. It was in this state of mind that Nora began to notice the presence of their neighbor Gareth. As a successful insurance salesman, Gareth was always full of charm and vitality. He had appropriate attire and a charming smile that easily made people let down their guard. At a community meeting, Gareth sat next to Nora and they talked all evening. "You know, Nora, you're more special than you imagine," Gareth said while accompanying Nora home, his voice deep and magnetic. "I've always wondered why Elias doesn't seem to have noticed this." Nora should have immediately stopped this ambiguous conversation, but Gareth's words were like a drop of water on dry soil. She had gone too long without being looked at and appreciated like this. In the following weeks, Nora found herself increasingly looking forward to chance encounters with Gareth. They began exchanging phone numbers, and text messages gradually shifted from friendly greetings to more intimate exchanges. Nora knew she was sliding toward a dangerous edge, but the feeling of being valued and appreciated was irresistible. "We're just talking," Nora told herself, "not crossing boundaries, not hurting anyone." But in her heart, she knew she was deceiving herself. The first real boundary crossing happened on a rainy afternoon. Nora claimed she was going to a book club, but was actually in Gareth's car. They spent the entire afternoon at a cafe in the outskirts of the city, sharing their dreams and disappointments. "I've always felt life should be more than this," Nora said softly, watching the blurry rain through the window. "Because it really is," Gareth said, taking her hand. "You deserve more." And so an extramarital affair began. Nora set a new password for her phone, deleted suspicious message records, and made up various excuses to go out. She told herself it was just temporary, just to fill the emptiness in her heart, but guilt grew day by day. Meanwhile, Elias began to notice anomalies. As an accountant accustomed to observing details, he noticed subtle changes in Nora's behavior patterns. At first, he tried to improve the marital relationship by increasing joint activities. He proposed weekend trips, booked restaurants Nora liked, and even suggested participating in community activities together. "Want to watch a movie tonight?" Elias asked one Friday night. "We haven't relaxed together in a long time." But Nora declined, citing fatigue. "I'm too tired today. I want to go to bed early. The community fundraising activity has drained me." But when Elias woke up at midnight, he found Nora whispering on the phone in the corner of the bedroom, quickly hanging up when she heard movement. Such situations became increasingly frequent, and Elias decided he could no longer deceive himself. He began collecting information purposefully, not out of paranoia, but to confirm his suspicions. He noticed how Nora and Gareth interacted at community events, those prolonged glances and accidental body touches. Once, he came home earlier than expected and saw Gareth's car driving away from their house. The truth was becoming increasingly clear, but Elias didn't act immediately. He needed conclusive evidence, not just for his own confirmation, but also for the legal proceedings that would come. He hired a private detective and began organizing the family finances, preparing for a possible separation. When Elias received the report and photos from the private detective, despite being mentally prepared, the pain of betrayal was still as sharp as a knife. 23 years of marriage, a family and life built together, betrayed like this. Elias had originally planned to calmly confront Nora after obtaining sufficient evidence, but fate gave him a more dramatic stage: Gareth's surprise birthday party. When he saw Nora sitting on Gareth's lap, all his plans changed. Sometimes, the most powerful response isn't intense confrontation, but cold revelation. When Elias returned home after the party, the silence in the house was deafening. For over 20 years, this place had contained so many memories: the laughter of children, the warmth of family dinners, holiday celebrations. Now, these all seemed like distant mirages. Elias didn't turn on the main lights, just the desk lamp in his study. He sat at his desk, turned on the computer, and began executing steps he had already planned. First, he logged into the family's joint account and transferred most of the funds to his personal account, leaving enough for Nora's short-term living. Then, he contacted the credit card company and froze all of Nora's supplementary cards. As the main income source and financial manager of the family, Elias knew how to protect his assets within legal limits. He wasn't trying to make Nora destitute, but to ensure he wasn't at a disadvantage in the divorce proceedings that would come. The next morning, Elias contacted a divorce lawyer and quickly initiated divorce proceedings. He provided the evidence collected by the private detective and testimonies from several neighbor witnesses at the party. Given that the evidence of Nora's wrongdoing was conclusive, the lawyer assured this would be favorable for property division negotiations. But Elias's actions didn't stop there. As a professional accountant, he had always been suspicious of Gareth's insurance business. At community gatherings, Gareth had inadvertently revealed some sales strategies that, in Elias's view, clearly violated industry norms. Elias had never delved deeper for the sake of community harmony, but now he decided to anonymously provide this information to the compliance department of Gareth's insurance company and the state insurance regulatory agency. This isn't revenge, Elias told himself. It's making wrongdoers take responsibility. While Elias was handling these matters, his phone was constantly receiving calls and texts from Nora. Initially, Nora's attitude was one of anger and accusation. "How could you do this?" Nora's first text read. "Humiliate me publicly, freeze my credit cards. Is our 23 years of marriage worth so little respect?" Hours later, Nora's tone was still hostile, but began to mix with panic. "You don't really understand the situation," she wrote. "Gareth has been pursuing me. I just lost my way for a moment. What do you mean by freezing my cards? I now have problems even with basic living." Elias didn't reply to any messages. He knew any dialogue was meaningless at this point. 23 years of marriage had died in that moment, and no explanation could change that fact. That evening, Nora came to the door in person, repeatedly ringing the doorbell and knocking. "Elias, I know you're home." Her voice came from outside, both angry and desperate. "You can't just lock me out. This is my home too." Elias stood behind the door, motionless. He listened to Nora's transition from anger to crying, but remained unmoved. Half an hour later, Nora finally left. The next day, she wrote via text message, "I'm finding a lawyer. You can't treat me like this. I also have a right to property." Elias forwarded this message to his lawyer, who replied that this was expected and assured he would handle everything well. Meanwhile, Camille and Gareth's marriage was also rapidly heading toward its end. According to neighbors' gossip, Camille demanded Gareth move out that night and changed all the locks. Gareth was forced to stay at a motel outside of town, and his reputation in the community plummeted. 3 days later, Camille posted a brief statement on the community forum, thanking everyone for their support and confirming she had initiated divorce proceedings. At the same time, she emphasized that she wished to maintain privacy and didn't want to discuss details. For Gareth, troubles were just beginning. He received a call from the insurance company, notifying him that his work was suspended pending investigation. Someone had reported serious irregularities in his sales process, including concealing key terms from clients and exaggerating policy benefits. "This is slander and a setup," Gareth shouted on the phone, but the company's position was firm. Until the investigation was complete, he couldn't continue working and wouldn't receive commissions. 1 week later, one evening, Elias met one of the neighbors at the shopping mall who whispered to him, "Nora has moved in with her sister. They say she barely took anything with her because with her credit cards frozen, she couldn't hire a moving company." Elias just nodded, expressing no emotion. He had decided to completely cut ties with the past, including any news about Nora. The divorce proceedings were more complicated than expected. The lawyer hired by Nora tried to obtain more property, claiming that her contribution to the family shouldn't be ignored. Elias's lawyer presented detailed evidence, including photos taken by the private detective, text message records, and testimonies from numerous witnesses at the party. Finally, considering Nora's misconduct and the fact that Elias was the main income source, the court ruled that Elias would retain most of the property. Nora received a small portion of the common property and limited transitional support, much less than she had hoped to obtain. Throughout the process, Elias maintained calm and focus. He wasn't punishing Nora, but protecting the fruits of his years of hard work. In his view, betrayal was a complete violation of marriage vows, with no justifiable excuses. Meanwhile, Gareth's situation was even worse. The insurance company's investigation revealed his fraudulent sales practices over the years. Many clients, especially elderly people, had purchased unsuitable insurance products due to his misleading guidance, some even losing large amounts of retirement funds. After the state insurance regulatory agency intervened, they not only fined Gareth heavily, but also suspended his professional license. Worse still, some affected clients began filing civil lawsuits, demanding compensation for losses. Gareth tried to contact Nora, hoping for some comfort or support, but Nora was no longer responding to his messages. From her perspective, Gareth was the culprit of her life's ruin, though she knew well that she also bore responsibility. "I'm completely ruined," Gareth wrote in an unreplied message. "No job, no marriage, about to lose the house. We could have been more careful, Nora." When Nora read this message, she only felt a hollow numbness. She had thought her relationship with Gareth was a way to escape ordinary life, a feeling of being valued. Now it looked like a disastrous mistake, with a cost far greater than she had imagined. 6 months later, Elias sat in the lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers. The judge had approved their divorce agreement, meaning the legal relationship between him and Nora was officially over. "Congratulations, Elias," said the lawyer, handing him a copy of the documents. "This outcome is better than I expected. You can now start a new life." Elias nodded, placing the documents in his briefcase. What was the final reaction from Nora's lawyer? The lawyer shrugged. Honestly, they didn't have many options. The evidence was too conclusive, plus so many eyewitnesses. Nora should feel fortunate to receive this property division. Leaving the lawyer's office, Elias didn't feel the relief or victory he had anticipated. 23 years of marriage had ended like this, leaving only legal documents and cold numbers. But he would by no means regret his decision. Betrayal was a boundary he could never accept, and no explanation or apology could change that. That night, Elias received a text from an unknown number. "It's Camille. Gareth was found guilty of multiple fraud charges today and will go to prison for 3 years. I thought you should know." Elias didn't reply. Gareth's fate was of no concern to him. He had only ensured that those who were deceived received justice. A few weeks later, Elias accidentally encountered Nora at the shopping mall. She looked much thinner than before, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, very different from the always well-dressed community activist she used to be. The moment Nora saw Elias, she visibly froze. She seemed to want to approach and say something, but Elias simply nodded and continued walking without hesitation. There was nothing left to communicate between them. Elias had heard that Nora found a job as a saleswoman at a department store, with income just enough to maintain her basic living. She had moved out of the community and shared an apartment with her sister. Occasionally, she would try to contact her former community friends, but most maintained a distant attitude. At a community barbecue, someone mentioned Nora and asked Elias if they kept in touch. "No," Elias briefly replied. "That's in the past." His attitude made it clear to the neighbors that this topic wasn't welcome for further discussion. In the community, people respected how Elias had handled the situation. He hadn't shouted, hadn't created more drama, but ended a relationship that was no longer healthy in a calm and decisive way. Meanwhile, Camille sold the house she shared with Gareth and moved to another city to start anew. She told friends she didn't want to continue living in a place filled with painful memories. "Gareth's behavior made me realize that I've been living with a stranger for the past 20 years, she said to a close friend before leaving. "He deceived me in our marriage and deceived clients in his work." I don't know which of his words were true. As time passed, Elias gradually established a new normalcy in life. He still lived in the house full of memories, but had redecorated most spaces, erasing traces of Nora's presence. His work continued to develop steadily, and he received an important promotion at the company. On weekends, Elias began trying new hobbies, gardening and photography, activities that allowed him to be alone without feeling lonely. He participated in some community activities, but always maintained a polite yet distant demeanor. However, deep inside, Elias knew he had changed. That ability to trust people, that frankness and openness, seemed to have been permanently damaged. Meanwhile, Nora's life had fallen into hardship. After the divorce, she moved into a small apartment on the other end of the city and began looking for work. But as a woman nearing 50 with no long-term professional work experience, the job market wasn't kind to her. "I'm sorry, but we're looking for candidates with more relevant experience," the hiring manager kindly told Nora after another failed interview. Nora barely found a job as a salesperson at a department store, with a salary just enough for basic living. She tried to contact her former community friends, but most maintained a distant attitude. "We're really very busy lately," a former good friend said on the phone, her voice full of awkwardness. "Maybe another time." Nora began to understand that she had lost not only her marriage and economic security, but also the social relationship network she had built over the years. In that community that valued family and morality, she had now become a figure to be avoided, a moral failure to be judged. Gareth's situation was even more difficult than Nora's. The insurance company's investigation revealed his deceptive sales behavior over years, leading not only to his dismissal, but to facing multiple civil lawsuits from clients. The state insurance regulatory agency revoked his license, meaning he could no longer work in the insurance industry. "Your conduct violated multiple industry regulations and ethical codes," a regulatory commission member said severely at the hearing. "We cannot allow such behavior to endanger consumer interests." With divorce, unemployment, and lawsuits, Gareth soon faced a financial crisis. He was forced to sell his luxury sedan and move into a rundown single-room apartment. That once confident and charming man now looked old and haggard. One day, Nora encountered Gareth at the supermarket. She wanted to turn and leave, but it was too late. Gareth had already seen her. "Nora," Gareth called out to her, with a pleading tone in his voice. "Can you give me 5 minutes?" Nora hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly nodded. They walked to a bench outside the supermarket and sat down. "You look good." Gareth tried to smile, but his smile seemed forced and weak. "Drop it, Gareth," Nora said coldly. "We both know I look terrible, just like you." Gareth's smile disappeared, replaced by a vulnerable expression Nora had never seen before. "I've been sued," he said quietly, "not just by the insurance company and regulatory agency, but by several clients. They say I deceived them and made them lose a lot of money." "Is that true?" Nora looked directly into his eyes. Gareth avoided her gaze, staring at the ground. "Business always needs some techniques. Everyone does it. Like the techniques you used on me?" Nora asked sarcastically. "Those compliments and promises?" Gareth didn't immediately answer. Finally, he raised his head, with a glimmer of something close to sincerity in his eyes. "I really was attracted to you, Nora. But I admit, I never thought things would go this far. I thought it was just a game, some fun that wouldn't hurt anyone. But it did hurt people," Nora said quietly. "Not just Elias and Camille, but ourselves too." They sat in silence for a moment, each absorbed in reflections on past decisions. "Do you regret it?" Gareth finally asked. Nora considered the question. Did she regret her affair with Gareth? Yes, considering the disastrous consequences it brought. But she also understood that relationship was just a surface symptom. The real problem was in her marriage and her own dissatisfaction. "I regret not honestly facing my marriage problems," Nora finally said. "I regret choosing escape rather than communication. As for what happened between us, it was a mistake from the beginning." Gareth nodded, looking both hurt and relieved. "I guess we both got what we deserved." "No, Gareth." Nora shook her head. "This isn't about deserving. It's about choices and consequences. We made choices. Now we face consequences." She stood up, ready to leave. "Good luck, Gareth. But please don't contact me anymore. We both need to face our own messes." After leaving the supermarket, Nora sat in her car for a long time, recalling the changes of the past few months. She had thought her relationship with Gareth could fill the emptiness in her marriage, but now she understood it was just a temporary escape, an erroneous confirmation of her self-worth. The real problem was never with Elias, nor with Gareth. It was in her own heart, that craving for external approval, that fear of ordinariness and aging, that cowardice of not wanting to face marital problems and choosing escape. When autumn came, the community held its annual harvest festival. Elias participated as a volunteer in the organization responsible for financial management. This was his first time playing an active role in a major community event since his divorce. At the event, Elias saw Camille. She was helping set up the booths, looking much better than a few months ago. Noticing Elias's gaze, Camille nodded and smiled at him. "I heard you sold the house," Elias asked during the cleanup after the event. "Yes," Camille confirmed, "moving out next week. Found a small apartment in the north of the city, close to my new job." New job? Nonprofit organization, helping elderly people avoid financial scams. A bit ironic, isn't it? Considering what Gareth did. Camille's voice carried a hint of bitterness, but more of relief. Elias nodded. "Sounds meaningful. Losing everything actually made me find direction," Camille continued. "I want to help those who might become victims of people like Gareth. You know? The investigation showed he defrauded over 50 elderly people. Some lost their life savings." This number shocked Elias. He knew Gareth had improper sales practices, but hadn't imagined the scale was so large. "The law will handle him," Elias said, but in his heart knew that legal sanctions were just part of the consequences Gareth had to face. The true punishment was losing everything, including self-esteem and future possibilities. Meanwhile, Gareth's legal troubles continued to mount. In addition to regulatory sanctions and civil lawsuits from clients, the prosecutor's office was considering bringing criminal charges against him for systematically defrauding the elderly. Gareth tried to reach settlements with victims through his lawyer, but his financial situation could no longer afford any meaningful compensation. He couldn't even afford lawyer fees, being forced to accept a public defender assigned by the court. When Nora heard that Gareth would face criminal charges, she felt complex emotions. On one hand, she knew Gareth had done wrong, hurting innocent clients. On the other hand, she also understood that she herself had been attracted by the same charm and wordplay. One evening, Nora received a call from an unknown number. It was Gareth's sister, informing her that Gareth had been convicted of fraud and sentenced to 3 years in prison. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry for dragging you into all this," the sister said, her tone full of reproach. "Though in my opinion, you both should take responsibility for your actions." Nora didn't contradict. She no longer tried to justify or find excuses for her actions. The mistake had been made, the price had been paid. Now, she could only try to rebuild her life among the ruins. Meanwhile, Elias's life was steadily moving forward. He had secured an important project at work, which could bring a promotion. His social circle, though smaller than before, consisted of friendships that had become more genuine and deep. One day, Elias received a call from a law firm, asking if he would be willing to testify in a civil lawsuit filed by one of Gareth's victims. This elderly man was a member of their community and had lost much of his retirement funds by purchasing unsuitable insurance products due to Gareth's misleading guidance. Elias agreed to help, but declined the request to appear in court directly. He provided a written statement detailing what he knew about Gareth's sales tactics and how he used community relationships to establish trust and then commit fraud. Throughout the process, Elias maintained professionalism and calm. This wasn't about personal revenge, but about making a person who abused trust take responsibility. In his view, Gareth's deception of clients and betrayal of Camille were consistent with his attraction to Nora. All exploited others' trust and weaknesses for personal gain. The following spring, Elias stood outside the courthouse, having just finished testifying in Gareth's case. The court found Gareth guilty of multiple fraud charges and, in addition to his previous 3-year prison sentence, ordered him to compensate the victims for their losses. Leaving the courthouse, the sun fell warmly on Elias's face. Over this year, he had gradually rebuilt his life. At work, he had secured a promotion. In his personal life, he began participating in some social activities, made new friends, and even dated occasionally, though he hadn't yet found someone special. "Elias," a voice called out to him. Turning around, he saw Camille approaching. "Thank you for your testimony today," Camille said sincerely. "Those elderly people will now at least get some of their money back." Elias nodded. "They deserve justice." They walked together toward the parking lot, sharing their recent situations. Camille was excelling in her new job, having helped numerous elderly people avoid similar financial traps. I heard Nora found a stable job at a department store, Camille suddenly said. She seems to be trying to rebuild her life. Elias showed no particular reaction. Nora's life had nothing to do with him anymore. He felt neither hatred nor sympathy for her, just a quiet detachment. Have you thought about forgiving her? Camille carefully asked. Elias stopped and looked seriously at Camille. Some things aren't about forgiving or not forgiving, Camille. They just happened, and you move on. My marriage to Nora is over, like a closed book. I don't hate her, but I'll never trust her again. Camille nodded understandingly. She understood Elias's feelings better than most. After all, she had experienced the same betrayal. They parted in the parking lot, each driving in different directions. On the way home, Elias passed a cafe he and Nora used to frequent. He didn't stop, feeling no desire to do so. The past was behind, his gaze only forward. Arriving home, Elias saw a letter from Nora in the mailbox. It was the first time she had tried to contact him this way since the divorce. Elias picked up the envelope, weighed it in his hand, then threw it in the trash without hesitation. Whatever Nora had written, apologies, explanations, or requests, no longer mattered. Their chapter had ended, and no words could change what had happened. Elias entered the house, closed the door, and began preparing dinner. Tomorrow would be a new day, and he had his own plans and goals. Life was continuing, though different from what he had imagined. But he found himself adapting to this new rhythm, even beginning to enjoy the freedom and peace it brought. On that warm spring afternoon, as the sun was setting, Elias sat on a lounge chair in the backyard, watching the garden he had planted beginning to bloom. Compared to his former self, always needing perfect control of everything, now he had learned to accept life's uncertainty, to maintain inner peace and firmness even after betrayal and disappointment. Having passed through the shadow of betrayal, traversed the storm of anger, Elias finally reached a new shore. Not forgiveness, but release. Not reconciliation, but genuine moving forward. The response to betrayal isn't necessarily perpetual anger, but certainly not weak acceptance. It's rebuilding one's life with dignity, firmly cutting ties with the past, establishing new boundaries and standards for oneself. In this process of rebuilding, Elias found himself stronger, clearer about his principles and limits. The pain of betrayal would never completely disappear, but it no longer controlled his life. This might not be the path he had once planned, but it could still lead to a valuable and peaceful future. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating content. We look forward to seeing you in our next story.